Happy to welcome you to our ongoing series of noontime lectures, the latest incarnation today. We'll be hearing from Felipe Vasquez, who's speaking on the title Names of the Land, Names on the Land. And Felipe is a graduate student at the University of Kent in ethnoecology and ethnobotany. He's been over here for about a month and a half looking at place names, with particularly those referencing yellow cedar and red cedar. And he's been looking into both the heritage and traditional ecological knowledge associated with those places, and also in relation to what they can tell us about climate change, global change, and how today those sites are faring and how Tlingit people see those sites today. What's fun about this project is he looked through our publication on place names. Over 3,000 place names were developed by Harold Martin and Tom Thornton, published in a book we have here. We sell downstairs in our gift shop, and very comprehensive index and inventory of place names throughout the region. And he identified those that had cedar in the title, and we're very excited to hear the results of this so far. It's kind of a preliminary report, but we're happy to have him here, and without further ado, I'll just let him tell us what he's discovered. Thank you.
Sure thing. Well, thank you, Chuck. You actually took about half the content from the first couple of slides of my presentation. Well, thank you very much for being here. This is actually way more people than I expected. And way more people than I wanted to, but that's just because I'm nervous. Funny story, I actually came in from Haines a few days ago, and they had an E. coli outbreak, and they tell you, don't drink the water, don't drink the water, and I'm thinking, oh God, that was me yesterday, just drinking everything. But then I looked it up, and the symptoms don't show for a couple days, and I woke up this morning, and I'm thinking, is the feeling in my stomach, am I sick, or am I just really nervous about presenting? But I think I'm just very nervous. So the first thing, I guess, that you guys might be curious to know is, who the heck am I? This is me when I was studying forestry at UBC in Vancouver a couple years ago, and much like me in this picture, I kind of came into the picture here, kind of brazenly, but feeling a bit out of place. But I felt like I had the skills. I study ethnobotany, which is a small subset of anthropology, the study of the relationship between people and plants. And I thought, well, I really wanted to come back to the west coast of North America, so Alaska sounds great. I called Thomas Thornton, Dr. Thornton, who's been super helpful, who wrote that book, and he says, yeah, none of my students wanted it, so come on over. And so it works out. And what Dr. Thornton has done very recently, what he's pretty well known for, is place names. So I'll start with a little bit about place names. There's place names that can tell you a lot about the people that live in and around that area. I mean, but they can be a little bit misleading. For example, Beer is a town in England that the name has actually very little to do with beer itself, but people like to joke about it. But I mean, similarly, here in Alaska, you have places like, what about Baranof Island? What does that tell you? That tells you that there were Russians here and that there was a man called Baranof, and if you dig deeper and deeper, you can actually learn a lot about the history of a place. But that in itself isn't ethnobotany, because ethnobotany needs some plants. So I thought and thought and thought, and so I came up with thinking, cedar. Cedar's great. So why cedar? Well, first thing is I knew a bit about it because I studied forestry, or I thought I did. But more importantly, in Tlingit culture, it has so many uses. This is both red and yellow cedar, which are two very different species. In addition to bentwood boxes, houses, halibut hooks, you can fill pages and pages of what you can do with cedar in just the traditional Tlingit uses of cedar. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the trees themselves. This is yellow cedar. You might see a few around Juneau, but you don't get too many of them, but there's absolutely no red cedar. And yellow cedar just has kind of this nice droopy foliage, no needles. It has these like round cones, and it has a very soft, very mellow looking yellow kind of wood that is supposedly a pleasure to carve. And this is where it grows. And that's all of southeast Alaska, heading to about Glacier Bay. And then for some reason, it grows up here. And we don't really know why. There's some theories, but that's a mystery for someone else to figure out. Western red cedar looks a lot like it. If you saw the leaves next to each other, you might be pretty hard-pressed to find any differences. Usually it's a bit deeper green color, and it has these beautiful kind of rosettes for cones, which I quite like. And it grows a lot further south. You won't get any red cedar further north than, say, Cake. But they're different species. They're even different in a different genus altogether. So why put them together? Well, they have enough similarities and differences to make it interesting, because they look very similar, and even the natives will tell you that, yeah, they look a lot alike, but they're actually two separate trees. And the uses can be pretty similar. They're both very good carving woods. They both resist rot for a very long time. You can find a fallen tree in the forest that fell 100 years ago, and it's still perfectly good on the inside. And you can make cloth out of the bark, but they have a couple different uses. For example, red cedar can be used for medicine, whereas as far as I can tell, yellow cedar is not used for medicine. And then they have some interesting synergies. Like, for example, you wouldn't make a dugout canoe out of yellow cedar. It splits too easily, apparently, and it's not as strong. But on the other hand, yellow cedar makes a fantastic paddle. I thought that was really interesting. You have a red cedar canoe, but you would rather paddle with yellow cedar. And so I thought bringing these two together would be good, and it would give me coverage across the whole landscape of southeast Alaska. But and so yeah, I got everything from this book, which Chuck didn't shamelessly plug it, but it's available for either $30 softcover or $70 in the gift shop downstairs. And it's actually a very interesting book, even if you know nothing about place names. I'd highly recommend it. Dr. Thornton writes really well, and he has a whole bunch of stories. But then I asked him for the data, and immediately look at this list of over 3,000 names, and this is me. Because it's in the book, it looks all nice, and it's on these beautiful maps, and it's got all these lists, and the translations are very neat. But what they don't tell you is that behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of drafting. One place can have several different names and different translations. There's more, like, they gather it from different communities, and different communities know about the place, but they might tell you it's somewhere slightly different or spell it differently. So go through this. But eventually, I came up with 23 different places all along this landscape. And I'm just showing you the entire landscape, but this is the more detailed map with the translations in English, excluding the one up there in Icy Bay. And immediately some questions arrived. I'm just thinking, why is there this weird grouping? Why is there a lot around here and a lot down there, but nothing in between, and nothing way up here until this one last point up here? Another thing that caught my eye is this point right here. It's called Inside the Red Cedar Village, or as far as I knew, that's what it was called. And I think, no, that can't be possible. There's no red cedar up there. And so immediately you have a couple mysteries. And these aren't just names that have cedar. I put in a couple like that might talk about cedar, but I don't know, like Dead Trees on Mountain or Bentwood Box Point. And so I figure I need to find out more about these places. And that's the place name thing. But I think place names can be a little dry, and like, what if nobody knows about it? So I've also been trying to get to the bigger picture. And I think, much like constellations, all these points will hopefully come together to paint something complete that has more meaning than just a collection of points. Like it's. So here's what I did, which is I spent a lot of time on ferries. I've been so far to Hoona and Haines and Juneau, which isn't a lot, but I'm about halfway there. And so I got to spend a lot of time here in what I think is probably the most beautiful building in Juneau, in their windowless basement, sorting through their archives. And spent a few weeks there, and I spoke to a great many people who told me to speak to a lot of other people. And I got to listen to many old recordings talking about place names, but nothing. So I decided to speak to people. I spoke to Brian Kleinens, who works at Sealaska Forestry. He tells me that they harvest all on their lands. And I spoke to old members who worked with Sealaska before harvesting cedars. I asked for their stories. And I spoke to carvers as well. And I asked for their stories and what they feel about cedar, and so on and so forth. And this is a brief summary of what I found. When I went to Hoona, I wish these were my pictures, but they're not, but they're under Creative Commons, so it's a fair game. I went to Hoona, lovely, lovely village, and I spoke to Gordon Greenwald, who is the master carver in charge of creating the poles and the screens for the tribal house at Glacier Bay National Park. And you can actually go there for a day, and the workshop is open, and you'll see them working on the totem pole. It's going to be ready in a couple months, and I would say go check it out. It's a very interesting story, and Gordon has told me some very interesting things as well. Later I went to Haines, and I spoke most notably to Wayne Price, also a master carver. Who runs, I think, the only working dugout canoe right now, and who takes it out. And when this building was opened, he took a party and paddled it out here for the ceremony. And so I think he's at the forefront of bringing that culture back. And then I also spoke to Lee Heinmiller, adopted Tlingit since he was 7 years old and runner of Alaska Indian Arts, who was a man and who's just a fountain of knowledge. If you ever go to Haines and go to his workshop, just ask him anything. You'll say, he's the kind of person you can say hi to, and 3 hours later he'll still be telling you stuff. He's fantastic. But so in the end, what did I find? Well, if you see this treasure chest, they clearly had the right idea. The real treasure is not the gold, it's the books. The first thing I found was that one point that was in Icy Bay. Well, it was called Yellow Cedar Village, and I asked the Forest Service about yellow cedar, and we were mentioning about the range, and they thought, it's really weird. We just found, like, a few months ago that there's this tiny speck of forest of yellow cedar right there. And again, they had no idea about this, but this is a point. This place, I don't even know if they got it when they went around the communities, but instead they got it from books that have existed for decades. I think you can find the place that's called Yellow Cedar Village in Federica de Laguna's book Under Mount St. Elias, which is astounding. It's something that was unknown to the government, to the best planners and policymakers, one would hope. They only found out about this recently, but they could have just asked the natives, and it was right there. The other place that I managed to find out a little bit about was that place called inside the Red Cedar Village that wasn't supposed to be there. And well, it turns out both Dr. Thorne and I were wrong, and it was a mistranslation, and it was supposed to be yellow cedar. So more problems. But now that's cleared up, and what I found out in Hoona was that it was a very extensive kind of camp. You had culturally modified trees everywhere. And I don't know if it actually looked anything like that back in time, but I imagine it was something similar. What Gordon told me, however, is that it's classified as an old village site, but he thought that it was actually a much more recent site, to about 80 years, because the houses were built stretching onto the beach, which is apparently not traditional Tlingit architecture. But unfortunately, anyone who might have been able to tell me more about the place has already passed away. So this is my problem so far. Nobody has been able to tell me anything about any of the places so far. This is a problem partially to do with geography. I've only been to 3 places where, as far as I know, none of the places actually fell within the traditional Tlingit territories that I've been to so far, with the exception of the one in Surge Bay. So that's something I've yet to investigate. Another thing is that I find it strange that there are literal gaps in the names on the landscape. Why is there such a big stretch between the north and the south groups? Why are there no names there? Has it been forgotten? Do people not want to talk about it? Because I think it's very interesting, especially because Cake was an active forestry town at one point. Another thing is that I never got to talk to any weavers, despite my best efforts. And it didn't have anything to do with people not wanting to talk to me. It had more to do with the limits of time and just who I ended up talking to, because Lehigh Miller took up like 8 hours of my time. And another thing is medicine, because when I ask about old stories, people tell me when I was younger, someone I knew was sick. I went and I asked, what can I do? And they told me, go grab the Red Cedar, go mix it with Devil's Club juice, and then they say, and there's a whole bunch of other things that they won't tell me, which is good. I'm not the right person to tell these things to. But as far as I know, nobody practices this anymore, and very few people know about it. I haven't been able to find any stories of Red Cedar used as a medicine that weren't at least 40 years old or more. But I did find a few things out. For example, is this knowledge, do the Cedar place names contain knowledge potentially new to science? Yes. Is the old knowledge still useful to people? Absolutely. People are using it every day, and the people are using it to make a living. And it's not just the elders, it is a younger generation of people. But is this being effectively communicated? It's difficult to say. One of the most heartening stories I heard was that in Hoona, they've recently got a grant to hire a full-time young apprentice to learn to carve. And this guy is 16 years old, when the next youngest assistant carver is 52 years old. And so you have to wonder, what is being passed on and what is not? As far as carving goes, I think it's quite healthy. As far as medicine goes, traditional medicine, that's a different story, and I hope to find that out, because I'm still halfway through the research. Another question I had was, are there any differences between the kinds of names? Because many of them will be called Village in the Yellow Red Cedar, or Yellow Cedar Bark Island, or something like that. And there's a lot of duplicates, but there are other places, we'll say Yellow Cedar, like Bendwood Box Point. Does that have anything to do with cedar? Is it just a separate story? And does everything have to do with resource harvesting, of just getting the bark, getting the wood? Or are there more other stories, more varied stories? And I have no idea yet. But, yes. Now, a lot of people, or some of you might have noticed that in the blurb for this presentation is that I was trying to see if these place names can be used to say anything about human adaptation to climate change. Because as a lot of people know, the yellow cedar is in decline. There's this great big debate about whether it should be called an endangered species or not. And I'm not going to say anything about that, but this is so far where it's been dying. And interestingly enough, none of the names I found, except for perhaps a couple around here, actually are happening where the trees have been dying. So I say either the Tlinkits of old really knew what they were doing, or there's something else going on, or it's just a fantastic coincidence that that's not happening. So there's been I've had absolutely no luck making that kind of headway. But I have been thinking about cedar as more of a tool of human adaptation in general, a way of preserving your culture and strengthening it, even in a society that tries to treat it as just a simple commodity. And so, very simply, I looked at use of cedar as an art form, carving and weaving, and there is an absolute renaissance going on. People are very interested nowadays. People are learning. People are still carving. They're being fairly successful at making a living out of working with cedar, although some have to do it as on a part-time basis. And it's not a huge amount of people, but I think it's enough that everyone knows, at least somewhere you can get a carving or something, or where the workshop is in town. And this has been the case everywhere I've been to. And I think that's actually very nice to hear. But I mean, how do you know that that's just becoming a tool? Is there some kind of spirituality? Because when you would harvest the cedar before, you would go to the tree, you would ask for forgiveness, you would offer a prayer, and then you would take what you needed and no more, and you didn't want to kill the tree, and you didn't want to, well, unless you had to for the wood, but if you were pulling bark, you didn't want to kill it because you'd be cursed. And are these things still happening? In many cases, yes. In other cases, no. I didn't just speak to experts. I tried to speak to everyone around who might have an opinion, some insight. And many people are very content to just know about cedar in a very abstract concept. They know it's a tree. They know you can carve with it. They might own a piece of art or two, but then that's about as far as it goes. But on the other hand, you have people who have really made it a part of their lives. So this is Herb Shaklee, who's an assistant carving at the Hoona Carver's Den. This is him holding up the mask and the speaking staff that he carved himself, and that he is carved with the story of his family and of his ancestors. And he very generously shared the story with me. He described it as, when he started carving 6 years ago, he described it as a door opening for him to his past. And with it, he's been able to connect with his clan leader more. And he's making new regalia, which is something that is, as far as I understand, very rare. And he says it's brought him closer to people, and he's managed to commemorate a lot of events that weren't commemorated before, such as the Hoona fire, which many people didn't want to, but his idea is that he needs to preserve this for the children, and I agree. But so there's tradition involved. Cedar is still important in some ways to talk when you're speaking about tradition in Tlingit culture. But even so, that doesn't mean it can't change. For example, in Haines, when I went to the carving workshop there, they're still making totem poles, but they would take one much like this, and before, what you would do would be you bury the totem pole. But now what you do is you hollow it out and you stake a metal pole, and then your totem pole stays up for much longer, until the wood breaks down. And then they take even they're doing even newer things. They're playing with lights. They would carve out some faces and make them out of glass and put lights behind them so they could be in mother of pearl or in abalone colors, and well, I think it's fantastic, actually. I mean, how many of you have seen those beautiful like formline iPhone cases? And they're talking about fashion and doing new things, and I think that's how you really keep things alive as well. So this is what I found so far. But moving forward, well, I have a lot of ground to cover in the next couple weeks. I'll give a quick recap of what I've done. So I found that the place names are important, but so far they've raised more questions than they've answered, and it's been difficult to find. People have been incredibly generous, sharing and helping me with all they can, but so far, no one has been able to tell me that specific information. But even so, I think that carefully studying these places has given me some interesting insights, and I plan on following those up. I haven't found anything to do with Red Cedar, just simply because I haven't gone to the right places. And so I've got a trail to follow. But one thing I do know is that the detailed knowledge behind these names in Tlingit is fading fast, and I want to find something that is more than just a list of names, because what really brings those places to life is the story behind it, how people have lived in relation to these names. Now, Cedar is a very specific subset. It's only 23 names in a list of 3,000, and many of those places do still have the story, so it's not as discouraging as it might seem. And in any case, I feel like people are making great strides in preserving Tlingit culture. In any case, it's actually been amazing to see. And so, what do I have left to do? I need to go to basically the southern half. Tonight I leave for Sitka. By Friday I will be in Ketchikan, and then I'll try to cover as much of Prince of Wales Island as I can. But and that'll be a very intensive 2 weeks, and I wish I had done it already so I could tell you more about it. But that is the plan. I want to talk to more weavers. I want to talk to them at harvesting. I've had a lot of secondhand stories about weavers telling me that the harvesting cedar bark is happening differently. There seem to be rules where you would only harvest cedar facing away from a trail, but that's no longer the case. People are harvesting all along the logging roads, which makes sense. But some people don't seem to know how much is okay to take from the tree. And I'd be interested to find that out. And, well, of course, the 90% of the remaining place names. So, yeah, I'll head south. I really wish I could have found time to go to Angoon and go to Cake. I had many stories, but I haven't been able to come and get in contact with anybody there. And just to recap, these are the remaining place names. So this is it so far. I think I'd really need to say that people here have been incredibly generous in helping me, both here at Sealaska and anybody else that I've spoken to. I have been told some of the most personal stories that I have ever heard in my life, and I am absolutely humbled by the experience that I've had here. To take a stranger who really has no business being here other than his own, and to treat me with sincerity is more than I could have ever asked for. So I say thank you. Okay, so I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'd be very happy to answer anything. Otherwise, I think I would just put you to sleep and it's time to go for lunch. Yes?
help me understand a little bit with some of your travels. You're obviously making the circuit and talking to folks. Are you also trying to get on the ground to where these place names are to see the place, to see are there significant stands of yellow cedar?
That would be fantastic. On a graduate student stipend, it's been very difficult. I've been trying to do the best I can. I've been trying to work with aerial photographs and maps of forestry inventories and things like that, but that's been given mixed results. That's why I didn't include it here yet. Hopefully that might give me some more results in the future.
I guess what I'm thinking is, given the pressure from past logging on national forest land as well as native corporation land, and of course, because of cedar's value, it is often targeted, and some ongoing logging. It's not like it was back in the 80s and 90s, but still existing. I mean, the only suggestion, you'll be speaking far wiser people than I, but if you are looking to try to get to some of these actual locations, I would prioritize those areas that are either sitting on national, like POW, that still has a lot of logging pressure, or native corporation land that is slated for logging. Certainly the Sealaska timber folks can help you with that.
Certainly.
Get to those places first. The place that's sitting, in a wilderness area.
Yeah.
You can come back in 10 years.
Well, interestingly enough, at least as far as Sealaska land is concerned, all these place names I found just kind of skirt the lands, but don't ever fall into any of the actual land. So I mean, at least they didn't have that in mind when they were arranging which land with the government. Yeah.
Was your only resource Tom Thornton's book? Is there, Ani, the Austin Goldschmidt book has a lot of place names as well?
I did read Hani. I think it's because this book was a collection of a lot of other resources. So Hani was in Dr. Thornton's book. I've read a lot of the major ethnographic works. A lot of them did end up here, and I've been using those to cross-reference. And then I tried to find all the English names that mention cedar, and there's about 15 of those in Southeast Alaska as well. And there's actually a bit of interesting overlap there as well. I haven't looked at it in too much detail. But other than that, the only other resource I can think is asking people themselves. Maybe they forgot something, or maybe. So that's about it. All right. Everybody's satisfied.
I want to mention there is something that Dolores Churchill always mentions to us. She's on our Native Artist Committee, and she always describes how when she teaches and what she learned from her mother, that when you go out and harvest roots, cedar roots for her basketry, she always makes it a real point to leave some behind for the next generation of people. So she's very strongly aware of the need to protect and preserve those resources because they're very valuable, and she wants to, her point of teaching basketry and teaching people how to do it is it'll continue and revive. So she builds that into her classes and her orientation to that. Well, thank you for coming. Like I said, like he said, this is a work in progress, and
Thank you for giving up your lunch hour.
To the end. And eventually, his report will be available in our archives, when it's written. So come back if you still have an interest in it.
That should be by the end of September.
Okay. Wow. Great.
Thank you.